The crystal chandeliers of the Maxwell Industries annual charity gala sparkled overhead like 1,000 mocking stars as Sarah Mitchell stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, her world crumbling around her. Just moments ago, she had been the respected head of the company's charitable foundation. Now, all eyes were on her as Richard Maxwell Jr., the CEO's son, pointed an accusing finger in her direction. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed through the speakers, "I regret to inform you that the woman we all trusted, Sarah Mitchell, has been embezzling funds from our charitable foundation for the past year. The evidence is irrefutable." The gasps and whispers that rippled through the crowd were like daggers to Sarah's heart. Her emerald green dress, bought secondhand for this special occasion, suddenly felt too tight, too conspicuous. She searched the crowd for a friendly face, but found only judgment and scandal-hungry stares. "That's a lie." Sarah's voice cracked as she fought back tears. "I've dedicated my life to this foundation, to helping people." But her protests were drowned out by the murmurs of the wealthy elite who had once praised her work. Victoria Maxwell, Richard's wife, stepped forward with a practiced look of disappointment on her perfectly made-up face. "Oh, Sarah," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "we gave you everything. We lifted you from your humble beginnings, and this is how you repay us." Security guards approached from both sides as Sarah's mind raced through the events of the past few months. The missing reports she'd been asking about, the late-night meetings she wasn't invited to, the strange glances from the accounting department, it all made sense now. She had been set up. In the front row, Eleanor Thompson, her mentor and the foundation's former director, turned away, unable to meet Sarah's desperate gaze. The betrayal stung worse than the accusations themselves. "Please," Sarah pleaded, "just check the records. I can explain everything." But her voice was lost in the chaos as the guards escorted her toward the exit. Through the grand windows of the Maxwell mansion, she could see camera flashes. Somehow, the press was already there. As she was led through the mansion's marble halls, Sarah caught a glimpse of herself in one of the ornate mirrors. The reflection showed a woman she barely recognized, her auburn hair falling from its careful updo, her green eyes wide with shock, her mother's simple pearl necklace gleaming under the harsh lights. Just this morning, she had been preparing to announce the foundation's new initiative to build schools in underprivileged neighborhoods. Now, she was being treated like a common criminal. Outside, the crisp October air in Burlington, Vermont hit her face like a slap. Reporter Jenny Hayes from the Burlington Daily thrust a microphone toward her. "Ms. Mitchell, how long have you been stealing from the Children's Education Fund?" Sarah's heart sank further as she realized the depth of the Maxwell family's preparation. They hadn't just planned her downfall, they had orchestrated a complete character assassination. Back in her small apartment that night, Sarah sat in darkness, her phone buzzing incessantly with messages and calls she couldn't bear to answer. Her mind wandered to her late parents, her father, a mechanic who had taught her the value of honest work, and her mother, a kindergarten teacher who had always said that kindness would prevail over cruelty. "I won't let them win," she whispered to herself, clutching her mother's pearls. "I won't let them destroy everything I've worked for." But as she opened her laptop to check her emails, she found her access to all foundation accounts revoked. Worse, her personal bank account had been frozen. The Maxwells had thought of everything. A sudden knock at her door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw Michael Brooks, a junior reporter from the Burlington Observer whom she had helped with stories about the foundation's work. His presence gave her a glimmer of hope, until she opened the door and saw his expression. "Sarah," he said, his voice heavy with concern, "you need to see this." He handed her the early edition of tomorrow's paper. The headline made her blood run cold, "Charity Crusader Caught, The Double Life of Sarah Mitchell." As she scanned the article, her hands trembling, Sarah realized this was more than just a false accusation. The Maxwells had created an entire fictional history of fraud, complete with fabricated evidence and supposed witness testimonies. But why? What had she discovered that made her such a threat? In the corner of her apartment, her grandmother's old rocking chair creaked softly in the draft from the window. Sarah sank into it, remembering the words her grandmother used to say, "Sometimes, sweetheart, when people try to bury you, they forget you're a seed." Looking out at the lights of Burlington below, Sarah made a promise to herself. She would not only clear her name, she would uncover whatever truth the Maxwells were so desperate to hide. But first, she needed to understand why they had chosen tonight, of all nights, to destroy her. The answer, though she didn't know it yet, lay in a single file she had seen on Richard Maxwell Jr.'s desk just last week. A file marked Project Phoenix that would change everything. The morning after the gala brought no relief to Sarah's nightmare. Burlington's usually charming streets felt hostile as she walked to her favorite coffee shop, the Daily Grind. Every passing glance seemed accusatory, every whispered conversation about her disgrace. "Your usual, Sarah?" Tommy, the elderly barista, asked with a warmth that made her eyes well up. His simple kindness was the first she'd encountered since last night. "Actually," a sharp voice cut in, "she won't be having anything here." Janet Cooper, the shop's owner and a major Maxwell Industries investor, emerged from the back. "We don't serve criminals." Sarah's cheeks burned as other customers turned to stare. She hurried out, Tommy's apologetic look following her through the window. But as she reached the sidewalk, she felt a tap on her shoulder. "Ms. Mitchell?" A tall man in his 50s stood before her, his silver hair and expensive suit marking him as someone from the corporate world she'd just been exiled from. "I'm James Harrison, from Harrison & Wells Law Firm. I've been following your situation, and I'd like to help." Sarah's first instinct was distrust, anyone could be a Maxwell spy. But something in Harrison's steady gaze reminded her of her father. "Why would you help me?" she asked cautiously. "Because 15 years ago, the Maxwells did the same thing to my sister," he replied, his voice low. "She didn't survive the scandal. But you have the strength to fight back." In Harrison's downtown office, Sarah learned she wasn't the first to face the Maxwell family's wrath. Claire Harrison had been a promising executive who discovered irregularities in Maxwell Industries' overseas operations. 3 days before she could report her findings, she was accused of corporate espionage. 2 months later, she took her own life. "Project Phoenix," Sarah whispered, remembering the file. "That's what connects everything, isn't it?" Harrison's expression tightened. "What do you know about Project Phoenix?" "Just the name. I saw it on Richard Jr.'s desk last week." The next day, all the foundation's financial records from our Southeast Asian educational programs were mysteriously relocated. "The timing isn't coincidental," Harrison said, pulling out a thick folder. "The Maxwell family has been buying up land in poor communities across Southeast Asia, supposedly for schools. But look at this." He spread out satellite photos showing construction sites. "These aren't schools they're building. They're factories. Sweatshops disguised as educational facilities." Sarah's stomach churned as the pieces fell into place. The foundation's reputation had made it the perfect cover for the Maxwell family's exploitation. And she, with her genuine passion for education, had been their unwitting front person. "I can help you fight them," Harrison offered, "but you need to understand what you're up against. The Maxwells don't just own businesses, they own judges, politicians, media outlets." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, Storage Unit 247, Burlington Central Storage. Code 5591. Go now. Delete this message. Harrison checked his watch. "I have a court appearance in 20 minutes. Take my card." "And Sarah? Be careful. Trust no one completely, not even me." The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, its rows of orange doors like silent sentinels in the afternoon sun. Unit 247 looked like all the others, but Sarah's hands trembled as she punched in the code. Inside, she found a single manila envelope. Within it were photographs, dozens of them, showing Richard Maxwell Jr. meeting with known criminal figures in various cities. But it was the last photo that made her gasp. Eleanor Thompson, her former mentor, standing in Richard's office, pointing angrily at what appeared to be the Project Phoenix file. The date stamp was from 3 days ago. A new text arrived, Eleanor Thompson. Riverside Park. 30 minutes. Sarah's mind raced. Eleanor had turned away from her at the gala. Was this a trap? Or had her mentor been trying to protect her all along? As she drove to Riverside Park, Sarah noticed a black SUV following her. She took 3 random turns, and it stayed with her. Remembering her father's driving lessons, she accelerated through a yellow light just as it turned red.
The SUV was caught at the intersection.
Eleanor was waiting by the river, her elegant figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. She looked older than Sarah remembered, more worn. "I'm so sorry about last night," Eleanor began, her voice thick with emotion.
"I couldn't warn you without giving everything away. They're watching all of us." "What's really going on, Eleanor?" "Project Phoenix isn't just about sweatshops, Sarah. It's worse. They're trafficking children, promising poor families educational opportunities, then forcing the children into labor camps. I've been gathering evidence for months, but they found out."
A twig snapped behind them.
Both women turned to see Victoria Maxwell emerging from the trees, a cold smile on her perfect face.
Behind her, two men in dark suits approached. "Oh, Eleanor," Victoria sighed, "you really should have learned from Claire Harrison's mistake." She turned to Sarah. "And you, my dear, have just walked into exactly the trap we needed you to."
Eleanor grabbed Sarah's arm. "Run," she hissed. "The evidence is in my office at home. Red notebook, false bottom drawer. Get it to Harrison." Sarah sprinted away as Eleanor stepped between her and Victoria's men.
The sound of a scuffle followed her, then a splash.
She didn't look back.
Racing to her car, Sarah's mind was chaos, but one thought crystallized: she wasn't just fighting for her reputation anymore. She was fighting for justice, for Claire Harrison, for Eleanor, and for countless children whose lives hung in the balance. The game had changed, and Sarah Mitchell, the humble woman from Burlington, was about to show the Maxwells exactly what she was made of. But first, she had to survive the night.
The drive to Eleanor's house was a blur of adrenaline and fear.
Sarah's hands shook on the steering wheel as she repeatedly checked her rearview mirror, expecting Victoria Maxwell's men to appear at any moment. The splash she'd heard at the park haunted her. Had Eleanor survived? The thought made her press harder on the accelerator. Eleanor lived in a modest Victorian house on Maple Street, its blue shutters and white trim a stark contrast to the growing darkness of dusk.
Sarah parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, staying in the shadows.
The house was dark, but something felt wrong. The back door was slightly ajar.
Taking a deep breath, Sarah slipped inside.
The interior was chaos, drawers pulled out, papers scattered everywhere.
Someone had beaten her here.
But they hadn't found what they were looking for, or they wouldn't have left such obvious signs of searching.
"Think like Eleanor," Sarah whispered to herself.
The red notebook, it had to be here somewhere. She made her way to Eleanor's home office, her heart pounding with each creaking floorboard.
"The false bottom drawer," Eleanor had said.
But which drawer? A sound from downstairs froze her in place.
Voices. Male voices.
"Check upstairs again," a gruff voice commanded.
"Ms. Maxwell wants that notebook." Sarah's eyes darted around the room.
There, Eleanor's large oak desk had 6 drawers. Moving as quietly as possible, she began checking each one. The bottom right drawer stuck slightly when she pulled it.
Bingo!
Her fingers found the edges of the false bottom just as footsteps started up the stairs. Working frantically, she pried it loose.
Inside lay a red leather notebook and a USB drive.
She grabbed both, replacing the false bottom just as a flashlight beam swept under the office door. There was nowhere to run. The window was too high, and the footsteps were getting closer. In desperation, Sarah slid under the desk, pulling Eleanor's chair close to hide herself. The door opened. "Nothing here, boss," a voice called after a cursory look.
"Place is clean." Sarah waited 5 full minutes after hearing the front door close before emerging from her hiding spot.
Her legs were cramped, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She had to get out before they came back. Safe in her car, Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe. She opened the notebook with trembling fingers and began to read. Eleanor's neat handwriting filled page after page with dates, names, and locations. But it was a photo tucked into the middle that made Sarah's blood run cold. It showed Richard Maxwell Sr., the family patriarch, shaking hands with a notorious Southeast Asian crime lord. The date stamp was from just 2 weeks ago. The USB drive contained even more damning evidence, financial records showing millions flowing through shell companies, emails discussing recruitment quotas for their supposed schools, and most horrifying of all, a video. The footage showed children, none older than 12, working in appalling conditions in what appeared to be an underground factory.
Sarah recognized the Maxwell Industries logo on crates in the background. Her phone buzzed, a text from James Harrison, "Are you safe? Meet me at St. Michael's Church. Now."
The historic church was dark except for a few candles near the altar. Harrison sat in the last pew, his silver hair catching the dim light.
"Did you find it?" he asked as Sarah slid in beside him. She handed him the notebook and drive. "It's worse than we thought. They're not just exploiting workers, they're enslaving children. We have to stop them."
"We will," Harrison assured her, "but we need to be smart about this."
The Maxwells have already started their next move.
They've filed criminal charges against you for theft and corporate espionage.
There's a warrant out for your arrest. What about Eleanor? Sarah asked, dreading the answer. Harrison's face grew grave. They found her body in the river an hour ago. They're calling it suicide.
Sarah felt the world spin.
First Claire Harrison, now Eleanor. How many lives would the Maxwells destroy to protect their evil empire?
"You need to disappear," Harrison said urgently.
"I have a safe house in the Adirondacks. My associate Marcus will take you there tonight."
"No," Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with her resolve.
"I'm not running. Eleanor died trying to expose the truth.
I owe it to her, and to those children, to finish what she started."
Harrison studied her for a long moment.
"You remind me so much of Claire," he said softly.
"But Sarah, you need to understand something.
The Maxwells aren't just criminals, they're connected to people in the highest levels of power.
Taking them down won't be easy."
"Nothing worth doing ever is," Sarah replied, touching her mother's pearls for strength.
"But I have something they don't, the truth."
Just then, the church doors burst open.
Victoria Maxwell strode in, flanked by 2 police officers.
"Sarah Mitchell," she announced with theatrical flair, "you're under arrest for the murder of Eleanor Thompson."
Harrison stood quickly. "I'm her attorney."
"You have no evidence of these ridiculous charges." "Oh, but we do," Victoria smiled, pulling out her phone. "Security footage shows Ms. Mitchell meeting Eleanor at the park right before her death."
"And these bruises on my arm?"
"From when I tried to stop Sarah from pushing poor Eleanor into the river."
Sarah stared in horror at Victoria's obviously self-inflicted bruises.
The Maxwells weren't just framing her for theft anymore, they were setting her up for murder. As the officers approached with handcuffs, Harrison whispered quickly, "Say nothing.
I'll get you out. The notebook and drive are safe with me."
But Sarah had already spotted something that made her heart race. Victoria's designer handbag was open, and inside was a familiar red notebook.
Not the real one that Sarah had just given Harrison, but an identical decoy. The Maxwells had planned this too.
As the cold metal closed around her wrists, Sarah caught Victoria's triumphant smirk. But Victoria hadn't noticed what Sarah had seen through the church's stained glass windows: Michael Brooks, the junior reporter, capturing everything on his camera from the shadows of the cemetery.
The game wasn't over yet.
In fact, it was about to become much more interesting. Being led to the police car, Sarah held her head high. Her mother had always said that dignity was the best revenge. But as she glimpsed her reflection in the car window, she saw something new in her eyes: not just dignity, but determination. The Maxwells thought they had won, but they had just made their biggest mistake. They had underestimated the power of a humble woman with nothing left to lose. The Burlington County Detention Center's harsh fluorescent lights cast unflattering shadows across Sarah's face as she sat in her orange jumpsuit, waiting for Harrison in the visitor's room. 3 days had passed since her arrest, and each hour felt like an eternity. "The good news," Harrison said as he settled into the chair across from her, "is that Michael Brooks got everything on camera."
"The bad news?"
"The footage has mysteriously disappeared from his camera, and he's been reassigned to cover high school sports in Alaska."
Sarah's heart sank. They got to him too. "But he left us something."
Harrison lowered his voice. "Before he left, he mailed this to my office." He slid a small piece of paper across the table. On it was a sequence of numbers: 23-14-78-92.
"What is it?" "No idea." But he risked a lot to get it to us. It must be important. Sarah memorized the numbers before Harrison tucked the paper away. How's the evidence from Eleanor's notebook? Harrison's expression darkened. Someone broke into my office last night. The notebook and drive are gone. Sarah felt the walls closing in. Everything they had gathered, all of Eleanor's sacrifice, is gone. But then she remembered something. The video on the drive, I recognized one of the locations. There was a sign in Vietnamese. District 7, Ho Chi Minh City. I spent 6 months there setting up one of our supposed schools. That's something, Harrison nodded. I have contacts in Vietnam who can. He was cut off by the entrance of an unexpected visitor. Richard Maxwell Jr. walked in, immaculate in his designer suit, his handsome face arranged in an expression of concern. Sarah, he sighed, pulling up a chair. This has all gone too far. I'm here to offer you a deal. Harrison stood protectively. My client has nothing to say to you. Actually, Richard smiled, I think she'll want to hear this. He turned to Sarah. Confess to everything, the embezzlement, Eleanor's murder, all of it. In return, we'll make sure you serve your time in a minimum security facility. Perhaps even early release for good behavior. And if I refuse? Richard's smile never wavered. Then I'm afraid something terrible might happen to your sister Amy and her kids in Seattle. Sarah's blood ran cold. She hadn't spoken to Amy in years, not since their parents' funeral. The fact that the Maxwells knew about her. That's witness intimidation, Harrison growled. Is it? Richard stood smoothly. I'm just expressing concern for Sarah's family. After all, Seattle can be so dangerous these days. He dropped a business card on the table. You have 24 hours to decide. After he left, Sarah buried her face in her hands. They're going to hurt Amy. No, they won't, Harrison assured her. Because I'm calling in reinforcements. That evening, in her cell, Sarah received an unexpected visitor, a prison guard she hadn't seen before. Angela Davis, the woman introduced herself quietly. I'm with the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. We've been building a case against the Maxwells for months. Your arrest actually helped us, it made them sloppy. Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. You're investigating them? For 2 years. But we need more evidence. Harrison tells me you recognized a location in Vietnam? Before Sarah could respond, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Angela quickly resumed her guard posture. Think about what I said about your commissary account, she said loudly, then walked away. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah's mind kept returning to the numbers Michael had sent, 23-14-78-92. Something about them seemed familiar. Then it hit her. During her time at the foundation, she had noticed Richard Jr. always used the same number sequence for his passwords, based on his children's birthdays. But this sequence was different. Sarah sat up in her narrow bed. The foundation's old storage facility. Unit numbers went up to 100, and each had a 4-digit access code. Could Michael have found something there? She had to get word to Harrison. But how? The answer came the next morning in the form of Lily Chen, her former assistant at the foundation, who arrived for visiting hours in tears. I'm so sorry, Sarah, Lily sobbed. I should have stood up for you at the gala. Sarah leaned forward. Lily, I need your help. Do you still have access to the foundation's storage facility? Yes, Lily's eyes widened with understanding. Tell me what you need. Sarah carefully wrote down the numbers on a tissue while pretending to wipe her eyes. Unit 23. Get whatever's inside to Harrison. That afternoon, Sarah received unexpected news. She had a new cellmate. When the cell door opened, she nearly fell off her bed in shock. It was Victoria Maxwell, her perfect makeup replaced by prison pallor, her designer clothes swapped for orange polyester. Don't look so surprised, Victoria spat, sitting on the opposite bed. Your friend Harrison apparently found evidence of my involvement in Eleanor's death. But don't worry, I won't be here long. Sarah studied the woman who had helped destroy her life.
Victoria's confident facade was cracking, revealing something Sarah hadn't expected to see: fear. "They'll get you out," Sarah said carefully.
"The Maxwells protect their own." Victoria laughed bitterly. "You don't know them like I do.
"Richard Jr. married me for my family's connections.
Now that I'm a liability." She left the sentence hanging. "Help me," Sarah found herself saying. "Help me expose them before they can hurt anyone else." Victoria's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose. "Why would I do that?" "Because right now, you're not just a liability, you're a loose end.
And we both know how the Maxwells deal with loose ends."
Before Victoria could respond, a commotion erupted in the corridor. Agent Davis appeared at their cell. "Sarah Mitchell, get your things. New evidence has been submitted in your case. You're being released on bail."
In the prison's processing area, Harrison waited with Lily, who was clutching a thick manila envelope.
"We found it," she whispered. "Michael left everything in that storage unit: photos, documents, hard drives. It's all backed up in multiple locations now."
Sarah felt hope rising in her chest, but one look at Harrison's face stopped her cold.
"There's something else," he said gravely.
"Amy called from Seattle.
Someone broke into her house last night.
Her children are missing."
Sarah's world spun. The Maxwells had raised the stakes to an unimaginable level. Now it wasn't just about clearing her name or exposing their crimes.
It was about saving her niece and nephew before they became two more victims of Project Phoenix. The war had truly begun, and Sarah had less than 48 hours to save the only family she had left.
The clock on Harrison's office wall ticked relentlessly as Sarah pored over the contents of Michael's envelope.
Her hands trembled as she thought of her niece Emma, 8, and nephew Tyler, 6, in the clutches of the Maxwell's trafficking operation. According to the police report from Seattle, the kidnapping was professional, Agent Davis said, pacing the room. "No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses.
But they left this."
She held up an evidence photo showing a business card for Maxwell Industries with a handwritten note: "Time is running out."
"We've got something," Lily called from Harrison's computer. "I've been going through the hard drives Michael left. There's a pattern in Maxwell Industries shipping manifests.
Every time they open a new school in Southeast Asia, there's a corresponding shipment to a warehouse in Portland."
Sarah's head snapped up. "Portland? That's only 3 hours from Seattle." Harrison leaned over Lily's shoulder. "The warehouse is registered to Phoenix Educational Supplies LLC. It's a Maxwell shell company."
"That has to be where they're holding the children," Sarah said, standing.
"We need to go now." "Wait," Agent Davis cautioned. "We can't just storm in. We need probable cause for a warrant, or any evidence we find will be inadmissible. While we wait for probable cause, my niece and nephew could be shipped overseas." Sarah's voice cracked with desperation. A knock at the door made everyone freeze. Victoria Maxwell stood in the doorway, still wearing her prison jumpsuit, flanked by 2 FBI agents. "She's agreed to turn state's evidence," Agent Davis explained.
"In exchange for protection." Victoria's carefully maintained composure showed cracks of genuine fear. "I know where they take the children before transport," she said. "Richard calls it processing.
The Portland warehouse is just a stopover.
They're moved to a private airfield outside the city within 48 hours." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face.
"When were they taken?" 36 hours ago."
Harrison was already reaching for his coat.
"I'll have my private jet ready in an hour." "No," Agent Davis interjected. "We do this by the book. Victoria's testimony gives us probable cause."
"I'm calling in a tactical team."
"That'll take hours." Sarah protested. "We don't have time."
A new voice spoke from the doorway.
"Then it's a good thing I brought backup."
Michael Brooks stood there, his camera around his neck, looking rather pleased with himself.
"Sorry about the Alaska story. Had to make the Maxwells think they'd won."
Behind him stood a group of familiar faces: Tommy from the coffee shop, Janet Cooper who had kicked Sarah out, and several other Burlington business owners.
"The Maxwells blackmailed all of us," Janet explained, stepping forward.
"They threatened our businesses, our families.
But Michael showed us the evidence. We're ready to testify. And I've got something better, Michael added, holding up his camera. Remember that footage that disappeared? I live-streamed it to a secure server. Victoria threatening Sarah in the church, everything.
Plus some very interesting conversations I recorded at Maxwell Industries over the past month. Agent Davis was already on her phone, coordinating with the Portland office.
This is enough. We can move now.
The next few hours were a blur of activity.
Sarah found herself on an FBI transport plane, surrounded by tactical team members.
Victoria sat across from her, providing details about the warehouse security systems.
Why did you really turn on them? Sarah asked quietly. Victoria's perfect mask slipped, showing raw pain underneath. I found out I couldn't have children, she whispered.
Richard said it was for the best, that it meant no loose ends in the family business. That's when I realized, all those children we claimed to be helping. I was part of destroying other women's families because I couldn't have one of my own. Sarah reached across and squeezed Victoria's hand, surprising them both. The Portland warehouse was a massive concrete structure near the industrial district. As the FBI team took positions, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, backloading Doc.
Come alone or they die. It's a trap, Harrison warned when she showed him.
Of course it is, Sarah replied.
But it's also my only chance.
Before anyone could stop her, she slipped away from the FBI perimeter and made her way to the back of the warehouse. Richard Maxwell Jr. stood waiting, looking as polished as ever.
I have to admit, Sarah, you've surprised me, he said smoothly. I didn't think you had this kind of fight in you. Where are they? Richard gestured to a door. Inside.
But before you go playing hero, you should know, this warehouse is rigged with explosives.
One wrong move, and well. He held up a detonator. All those poor children, including your precious niece and nephew.
You'd die too, Sarah said, stepping closer.
Would I? Richard smiled. There's a tunnel system below. I can be gone in seconds. You have one chance. Take the blame for everything, the trafficking, the murders, all of it. Sign a confession, and the children go free.
Sarah felt eerily calm as she took another step toward him.
You know what your mistake was, Richard? You thought because I was kind, I was weak. Because I was humble, I was stupid.
But my parents taught me something you never learned. True strength isn't about power over others.
It's about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost.
As she spoke, she was aware of movement in the shadows behind Richard. Victoria had followed her.
Pretty speech, Richard sneered. But in the real world.
He never finished the sentence.
Victoria crashed into him from behind, sending the detonator flying.
Sarah dove for it as Richard grappled with his wife. You treacherous bitch, he snarled. No, Victoria gasped as they struggled. I'm finally being loyal, to my conscience.
FBI agents swarmed in from all sides.
Richard was quickly subdued, but he was laughing.
You're too late, he spat. The plane's already gone. The children are on their way to. Actually, Agent Davis interrupted, the plane never took off. We found the pilot very cooperative once we froze his offshore accounts. The children are safe. Sarah was already running inside.
In a back room, she found Emma and Tyler, scared but unharmed, along with 20 other children who had been destined for Maxwell's trafficking operation. As she hugged her niece and nephew close, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in a warehouse window. She saw her mother's pearls around her neck, and for a moment, she could almost hear her mother's voice. Sometimes the greatest victories come from the humblest hearts. Outside, dawn was breaking over Portland. Richard and his associates were being led away in handcuffs as news cameras rolled. But Sarah's fight wasn't over. There were still Maxwell operations around the world to shut down, children to save, and corrupt officials to expose. But for now, holding Emma and Tyler, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt since the night of the gala, hope. The Maxwells had tried to bury her. They never expected her to bloom. 1 week after the Portland raid, Sarah sat in Harrison's office watching news coverage of the Maxwell scandal unfold. Richard Maxwell Jr. and several high-ranking executives had been indicted on multiple charges, but Richard Sr., the family patriarch, remained conspicuously absent.
Breaking news, the anchor announced.
In a shocking development, Maxwell Industries stock has plummeted following allegations of child trafficking.
However, sources say that billions in company assets were transferred to offshore accounts hours before the arrests. They knew, Sarah said, turning to Harrison. Someone warned them. It gets worse, Agent Davis added, walking in with a thick file. Richard Maxwell Sr. was spotted boarding a private jet to Singapore yesterday.
And this morning, our key witness, Victoria Maxwell, disappeared from protective custody.
Sarah's stomach dropped. Was she taken?
No, Davis replied grimly. Security footage shows her leaving voluntarily.
She left this. She handed Sarah a note written in Victoria's elegant hand. I'm sorry. They have my sister.
The door burst open and Lily rushed in, her face pale.
You need to see this. She turned up the volume on the TV.
Richard Maxwell Sr.'s distinguished face filled the screen, speaking from what appeared to be a luxury hotel suite.
These allegations against my family are preposterous.
Sarah Mitchell, a former employee with a history of mental instability, has orchestrated a vindictive campaign of lies. We have evidence that she, along with Eleanor Thompson, was the true mastermind behind any criminal activities.
That's insane. Sarah protested, but Maxwell Sr. wasn't finished.
Furthermore, we have proof that Ms. Mitchell has been working with international criminal organizations. The recent raid in Portland was actually a cover-up for her own trafficking operation. We are cooperating fully with authorities and expect all charges against my son to be dropped.
Harrison muted the TV. They're trying to rewrite the narrative.
And with their resources.
It's not just that, Agent Davis interjected. 3 federal judges have already recused themselves from the case.
Our search warrants for Maxwell properties are being challenged.
They're mobilizing their entire network. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Amy in Seattle, men watching the house. Kids scared. What should we do?
Before she could respond, Michael Brooks rushed in.
Sarah, Janet Cooper, and the other witnesses, they're all backing out. Someone's gotten to them. And that's not all.
He pulled up a news site on his phone. The headline made Sarah's blood run cold. Maxwell whistleblowers found dead in apparent murder-suicide.
Tommy and his wife, Michael explained softly.
The coffee shop owner and his wife were found in their home this morning.
Sarah felt the walls closing in.
Everything they'd built, all the evidence they'd gathered, the Maxwells were systematically destroying it all.
We need to disappear, Harrison said urgently. I have contacts who can get you and your family to safety.
No, Sarah stood, her mother's pearls catching the light.
That's exactly what they want. If we run now, they win.
All those children, Eleanor's death, Tommy's sacrifice, it will all be for nothing.
But how can we fight back? Lily asked. They control everything. Not everything, Sarah said, an idea forming. Michael, the footage you live streamed, where exactly did you send it? A secure server in Iceland. Why? Sarah turned to Agent Davis. The Maxwell empire is built on reputation.
They're trying to destroy mine to save theirs.
But what if we could show the world the truth? Not just about the trafficking, but about everything? A full exposure, Harrison caught on. But we'd need a platform they don't control. I think I know someone who can help, Michael said. Remember Catherine Reynolds? Sarah's eyes widened. Catherine Reynolds was a media mogul known for her fierce independence and dedication to investigative journalism.
More importantly, she was the only major media figure who had ever successfully stood up to the Maxwells. She's in New York, Michael continued. And she owes me a favor.
It's too dangerous, Harrison protested. The Maxwells will know the moment we try to contact her.
Then we'll need a distraction, Sarah said.
She turned to Agent Davis. How many of your human trafficking task force members are still loyal? Most of them. The Maxwells haven't reached that deep into the FBI yet. Good.
Because I think I know where Victoria's going, and where we'll find Richard Maxwell Sr.'s real operations center. Sarah pulled up a photo on her phone, one she'd taken during her foundation work in Singapore. In the background of a charity event photo was a building with a familiar logo, a phoenix rising from flames.
The Maxwell's Asian headquarters, she explained.
Victoria once mentioned that Richard Sr. keeps his most sensitive files there, in a secured vault. Everything: blackmail material, financial records, evidence of judicial corruption. That's on the other side of the world, Harrison pointed out.
Exactly.
They'll never expect us to strike there. They think we're running scared.
Agent Davis studied the photo. I'll need authorization for an international operation. That takes time. Time we don't have, Sarah countered. But I still have access to the Foundation's travel accounts. They're so focused on their damage control, they haven't shut them down yet. Sarah, Harrison said quietly, if you go there, you might not come back.
She touched her mother's pearls, remembering her words about standing up for what's right.
I made a promise to those children. To Eleanor. To Tommy. I'm going to keep it.
You're not going alone, Michael declared, holding up his camera.
This could be the story of the century.
Lily stepped forward. I still have all the Foundation's access codes.
I'm coming too.
Sarah looked at her small but determined band of allies. Against them stood one of the most powerful families in the world, with nearly unlimited resources and a network of corrupt officials at their command. The odds were impossible. But Sarah had learned something important since the night of the gala: sometimes the greatest power comes not from wealth or influence, but from having nothing left to lose. Book the flights, she told Lily.
We leave tonight. As they prepared for their most dangerous mission yet, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, was Victoria leading them into a trap, or was she truly trying to save her sister? And what would they find in Singapore that was worth Richard Maxwell Sr. risking everything to protect?
The answers would change not just their lives, but the very foundations of power in America. Singapore's gleaming skyline shimmered in the tropical heat as Sarah, Michael, and Lily made their way through the crowded streets of the financial district. They'd been in the city for 48 hours, carefully establishing their cover as Foundation representatives conducting a routine audit.
There's Victoria, Michael whispered, nodding toward the towering Maxwell Industries Asia headquarters.
Through the glass facades, they could see Victoria Maxwell entering the building, her signature perfect posture unmistakable even from a distance. She's already passed through 3 levels of security, Lily reported, monitoring the building's systems through her tablet.
Whatever's in that vault must be worth risking her protection agreement for.
Sarah adjusted her business suit, a far cry from her prison jumpsuit of just weeks ago.
Remember the plan.
Lily, you have 20 minutes to loop the security feeds. Michael, get into position on the roof of the building across the street.
If anything goes wrong...
Catherine Reynolds is standing by, Michael assured her, patting his satellite phone. One call, and the whole story goes live across every independent news network in the world. As Sarah approached the building's entrance, her mother's pearls felt heavy against her throat. The security guard smiled professionally as she swiped her still-active Foundation ID card. Eleanor had always insisted that low-level credentials be updated only quarterly, a bureaucratic oversight that was now their greatest advantage. Ms. Mitchell, a smooth voice called as she reached the executive floor.
What an unexpected pleasure.
Richard Maxwell Sr. stood in the corridor, immaculate in a tailored suit, his silver hair and patrician features projecting grandfatherly warmth. Only his eyes, cold as Arctic ice, betrayed his true nature.
Mr. Maxwell, Sarah replied steadily. I'm here for the audit. Are you? He smiled, gesturing toward his office. Please, join me for a moment. We have so much to discuss. Sarah's heart pounded as she followed him into a corner office with sweeping views of the city.
Victoria was already there, standing by the window, her face unreadable. You see, Sarah, Maxwell Sr. continued, I've always admired your dedication. Even now, pursuing this misguided crusade, your determination is impressive.
He pressed a button, and steel shutters slid down over the windows. It reminds me of your father. Sarah froze. What do you know about my father?
John Mitchell was a principled man. When he discovered certain irregularities in the repair contracts at his garage, vehicles being used for what he called suspicious activities, he felt compelled to investigate. Such a shame about that brake failure on the mountain road. The room spun as Sarah gripped the back of a chair. You killed my parents? Business is business, my dear. Just as it is now. He turned to Victoria. Show her. Victoria pressed a remote, and a wall panel slid aside, revealing a large screen. On it was a live feed of Amy's house in Seattle. Emma and Tyler were playing in the backyard, watched by men in dark suits. You didn't really think we'd let them go, did you? Maxwell Sr. smiled. Their insurance. Now, let's discuss terms. You'll make a full confession, accepting responsibility for everything. In exchange, your family lives. Refuse. He let the threat hang. There's something you should know first, Sarah said quietly. Oh? I learned from the best about keeping insurance. She pulled out her phone, showing him a live stream of his own grandson, Richard III, age 6, playing at his private school in Switzerland. Did you really think I came here without leverage? Maxwell Sr.'s composure cracked for just a moment. You're bluffing. Am I? Ask Victoria where she really went when she escaped protective custody. Victoria stepped forward, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, Richard. But I couldn't let you do to those children what you did to my sister. Not anymore. You see, Sarah continued, Victoria didn't just find her sister, she found evidence of decades of Maxwell family crimes. And right now, Catherine Reynolds has a team assembling the story. One call from me, and it all goes public. Every dirty deal, every murdered witness, every corrupted official. You'd risk your own family? Maxwell Sr. demanded. I learned something else during this fight, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. Evil thrives when good people are afraid to sacrifice everything to stop it. My parents taught me that principles matter more than fear. A knock at the door interrupted them. Agent Davis entered with a team of Interpol agents. Richard Maxwell Sr., Davis announced, you're under arrest for multiple charges including human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and international racketeering. You have no jurisdiction here, Maxwell Sr. snarled. Actually, a new voice said, they do. An elderly Asian man entered, the Singapore Minister of Justice. We've been building our own case against your operations, Mr. Maxwell. The evidence Ms. Mitchell and Mrs. Maxwell provided was most illuminating. As Maxwell Sr. was led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him, he turned to Sarah one last time. You'll never be safe. There are others, powerful people who... I know, Sarah interrupted. That's why Catherine Reynolds isn't just publishing a story about the Maxwells. She's exposing the entire network. Right now, raids are happening across 4 continents. Bank accounts are being frozen. Corrupt officials are being arrested. She stepped closer to him. You taught me another lesson, Mr. Maxwell. When you try to bury someone, make sure they don't have friends who know how to dig. In the aftermath, Sarah watched from the window as news helicopters circled the building. Her phone buzzed with a message from Agent Davis. Amy and the children were safe, the Maxwell men at their house now in custody. Victoria touched her arm gently. Your parents would be proud. There's still so much to do, Sarah said, watching more police cars arrive. Other trafficking networks, more children to save. And we'll face it together, Michael said, entering with his camera rolling. The world is watching now. The truth is coming out. As Sarah finally left the Maxwell building, she saw her reflection in the glass doors, a humble woman from Vermont who had brought down an empire of evil. Her mother's pearls caught the Singapore sunlight, reminding her that true power doesn't come from wealth or influence, but from the courage to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. But even as she savored this victory, Sarah knew the fight wasn't over. Maxwell Sr.'s last words echoed in her mind, there were others, more shadows to bring into the light. The next chapter of her journey was just beginning. 3 months after the Singapore raid, Sarah stood at the podium of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, her mother's pearls gleaming under the chamber lights. The Maxwell case had opened a Pandora's box of international corruption, and she had been invited to testify about corporate human trafficking networks. The tactics are always the same, she explained to the assembled diplomats. They promise education and opportunity to impoverished communities. They exploit our charitable instincts. They hide behind respected corporate brands. But thanks to the evidence we uncovered, we now know the extent of these operations. In the audience, Catherine Reynolds nodded encouragingly. The media mogul's coverage of the Maxwell scandal had sparked a global movement against corporate corruption. Next to her sat Michael, still filming, and Lily, who had become an expert at tracking international money laundering. We've identified 47 corporations using similar schemes, Sarah continued. The Maxwell documents revealed a web of shell companies, corrupt officials, and compromised institutions spanning 63 countries.
But knowledge isn't enough, we need action.
As she spoke, her phone buzzed silently in her pocket. It would be Harrison, updating her on the latest developments.
The legal fallout from the Maxwell case was still unfolding.
Richard Maxwell Sr. had been found dead in his Singapore cell 2 weeks ago, an apparent suicide, though Sarah had her doubts. Back in her hotel suite that evening, Sarah reviewed the day's developments with her team. Victoria, who had received immunity for her cooperation, was connecting them with other corporate whistleblowers.
Agent Davis had been promoted to head a new international task force against human trafficking. The Carlyle Group is next, Harrison announced via video call. We found links between their Southeast Asian operations and the Maxwell network. But they're already moving to cover their tracks. Not fast enough, Lily interjected, turning her laptop to show them. Their security isn't as good as they think. Look what I found in their Singapore subsidiaries' records. The documents revealed a familiar pattern: charitable foundations, construction projects for schools that were never built, large transfers of money to offshore accounts. They're learning, though, Michael added.
After what happened to the Maxwells, these companies are getting smarter about hiding their operations.
Sarah was about to respond when a knock at the door silenced everyone. Through the peephole, she saw a hotel employee with a room service cart. But something felt wrong, she hadn't ordered anything.
"Get down," she shouted, just as the door burst open. 2 men in black tactical gear rushed in, weapons raised.
But Sarah's team was ready. Agent Davis's training had prepared them for this. Lily triggered the emergency beacon as Michael live-streamed everything. Sarah ducked behind an overturned table as bullets sprayed the room.
From the corner of her eye, she saw Victoria tackle one of the attackers, her self-defense training evident in her precise movements.
The fight was over in minutes.
Hotel security and Davis's nearby team members stormed in, subduing the attackers. One of them, pressed against the floor, spat out words in Russian.
He says the Carlyle Group sends their regards, the translator reported later.
They want you to understand that not everyone can be saved like the Maxwell children were. Rather than intimidating her, the attack strengthened Sarah's resolve. In the following days, as headlines screamed about the assassination attempt, support poured in from around the world.
Other whistleblowers came forward, encouraged by her survival and determination.
"We need to go bigger," Sarah announced to her team a week later. They had relocated to a safe house in the Swiss Alps, courtesy of Catherine Reynolds.
The Carlyle Group isn't just about trafficking. They're part of something larger.
She spread out documents on the table, financial records, satellite photos, witness statements.
Look at the pattern. Every major trafficking network we've uncovered is connected to arms dealing, drug trafficking, and political corruption. It's not just about profit, it's about power. We're talking about taking on the entire global black market, Harrison cautioned through the secure video link.
These people make the Maxwells look like amateurs.
That's exactly why we have to do it, Sarah replied, touching her mother's pearls. Because no one else will.
Victoria, her face illuminated by the alpine sunset, nodded in agreement.
I've been making calls to my old society contacts. You'd be surprised how many wealthy people are tired of being blackmailed by these networks. They're willing to help, anonymously, of course. And I've been building something, Lily added, opening her laptop. A secure platform for whistleblowers. We can connect people who want to expose corruption while protecting their identities. Michael held up his camera. The world is watching now.
Thanks to Catherine's networks, we can broadcast evidence of corruption instantly, before they can cover it up.
Sarah walked to the window, looking out at the snow-capped peaks. She thought about how far she'd come from that horrible night at the Maxwell Gala.
The humble foundation manager had become something she never expected, a symbol of resistance against corporate corruption. "We'll need a name," she said finally.
"Something to give people hope."
Phoenix Foundation, Victoria suggested.
"Because we help people rise from the ashes of corruption." As if in response, Sarah's phone lit up with a message from Agent Davis, "New evidence from Malaysia. Another trafficking operation. Children involved. How soon can you be there?"
Sarah looked at her team, the journalist, the tech expert, the reformed socialite, each bringing their own skills to the fight. They had become more than colleagues in this battle, they were family. "Tell them we're coming," she said, already reaching for her go bag. "And tell them to remember what happened to the Maxwells.
Because this time, we're not just saving the children, we're changing the system that endangered them."
As their helicopter lifted off into the alpine night, Sarah thought about all the humble people around the world suffering under the weight of corruption and greed. The Maxwells had taught her an important lesson: evil thrives in the shadows, feeding off people's fear and isolation. But they had forgotten something crucial: when humble people stand together, their combined light can illuminate even the darkest corners of power. The war was far from over, but for the first time, the odds were beginning to shift. The Malaysian jungle sprawled beneath their helicopter like a vast green carpet as Sarah and her team approached the coordinates Agent Davis had provided. In the past month, the Phoenix Foundation had grown from a small group of whistleblowers into a global network of corruption fighters. "Thermal imaging shows activity in those buildings," Lily reported, studying her tablet.
"At least 30 heat signatures consistent with children."
Sarah gripped her mother's pearls, a habit she'd developed during tense moments.
This operation was different from the others.
According to their intelligence, the Carlyle Group's Malaysian operation wasn't just another trafficking hub, it was their command center for all of Southeast Asia.
"Catherine's teams are in position," Michael confirmed, checking his satellite phone.
"The moment we confirm the children's presence, she'll broadcast everything live." Victoria, who had traded her designer clothes for tactical gear, studied the compound through binoculars.
"Something's wrong.
The security pattern is different from other Carlyle facilities.
This looks more military."
Before Sarah could respond, the helicopter's warning system screamed to life. "Missile lock," the pilot shouted, throwing them into evasive maneuvers. "They were expecting us," Sarah realized as they crashed through the canopy, the pilot fighting for control. "Someone leaked our plan." They hit the ground hard, but the pilot's skill kept them alive. As they evacuated the smoking helicopter, gunfire erupted from the jungle. "Over here," a voice called in accented English. A group of figures emerged from the foliage, local resistance fighters who'd been helping them track the Carlyle operations. Maya, their leader, introduced herself as they took cover.
"We've been monitoring the compound. 3 days ago, something changed."
They brought in new security teams, professional military contractors.
"Why go to such lengths to protect this facility?" Sarah wondered aloud. "Because it's not just about trafficking," a familiar voice said.
They turned to see James Chen, Victoria's presumed dead sister, emerging from the shadows. "This is where they keep their insurance, blackmail material on half the world's political and business elite." Victoria's cry of joy at seeing her sister alive was cut short by another burst of gunfire.
They needed to move.
Under Maya's guidance, they navigated through the jungle, eventually reaching a hidden observation post overlooking the compound. What they saw confirmed their worst fears, and revealed something even more sinister.
"Those aren't just security contractors," Maya said grimly.
"Those are members of the Shadow Brigade, mercenaries who work for the highest levels of international organized crime. Look," Lily pointed to a group of men exiting a building. "I recognize him from the Maxwell files, Senator Williams from the Intelligence Committee. And that's Judge Chun from the International Court of Justice."
"They're not here as prisoners," Sarah realized. "They're here for a meeting."
Through their surveillance equipment, they could hear fragments of conversation. Words like global restructuring and New World Order drifted up to their position. "It's a summit," James explained. Every year, the real powers behind companies like Carlyle Group meet to divide up their territories and operations. The trafficking, the arms deals, the drug trade, it's all coordinated from here.
Sarah's phone buzzed, a message from Agent Davis: UN vote on anti-trafficking measures delayed. Suspicious wire transfers to key delegates traced to Malaysia.
Now we know why they rushed this meeting, Sarah said.
They're not just coordinating operations, they're actively subverting international law.
But they had a bigger immediate problem. The children were being moved, loaded onto trucks under heavy guard.
We have to act now, Sarah insisted. It's a trap, Victoria warned. They're using the children as bait, trying to draw us out.
Then we'll give them what they want, Sarah replied, but on our terms.
What followed was the most daring operation the Phoenix Foundation had ever attempted.
While Maya's fighters created a diversion on the compound's north side, Lily hacked into their communications system, sowing chaos among the security teams. Michael, broadcasting live through Catherine's network, captured everything, including the moment Sarah and Victoria, covered by James and the resistance fighters, breached the compound's defenses. But the real shock came when they reached the central building. The vault containing the blackmail materials wasn't just files and documents, it was a sophisticated data center, collecting and processing information from surveillance operations around the world. This is how they maintain control, Lily breathed, quickly downloading everything she could. They don't just have evidence of past crimes, they're actively monitoring their targets. Sarah Mitchell, a cultured voice, called from the doorway.
We need it last. Alexander Carlyle himself stood there, elegant in his bespoke suit despite the jungle heat. Unlike the Maxwells, he didn't bother with a benevolent facade.
I must admit, you've caused us quite a bit of trouble, he continued.
First the Maxwells, now this.
But I'm afraid this is where your crusade ends.
Is it? Sarah asked calmly.
Take a look outside. Through the windows, they could see helicopters approaching, not just law enforcement, but media crews from every major network in Asia.
Catherine Reynolds had done her part. Your hidden kingdom isn't so hidden anymore, Sarah declared.
Every face, every conversation, every deal made here today, it's all being broadcast live. Carlyle's composed exterior cracked slightly.
You think exposure is enough? We own the systems you're trying to use against us. Courts, media, governments, we control it all.
Not anymore, Lily announced, finishing her download.
Your own surveillance network just became your weakness.
Every corrupt judge, every compromised official, every secret deal, it's all being uploaded to servers around the world.
And here's something else, Victoria added, holding up her phone.
On it was a video call with dozens of faces, wealthy, powerful people Carlyle recognized.
Your former clients have chosen a different path. They're tired of being controlled by fear.
The sound of helicopters grew louder as Agent Davis's international task force arrived.
But even as Carlyle was led away in handcuffs, Sarah knew this wasn't over.
There will be others, he warned. What we built here, the system of control, it's bigger than any one person or organization.
I'm counting on it, Sarah replied. Because now we know how to fight it.
As they oversaw the rescue of the children and the securing of evidence, Sarah received a message from Catherine Reynolds: UN vote back on.
Compromised delegates exposed. Reform measures passed.
Looking at her teen, Victoria reunited with her sister, Michael documenting everything, Lily securing the digital evidence, Maya and her fighters standing proud, Sarah felt a familiar warmth in her chest. Her parents had taught her that one person standing up for what's right could inspire others to do the same.
The Phoenix Foundation was living proof of that principle.
But as she watched the sun set over the Malaysian jungle, Sarah knew that their greatest battles still lay ahead. The hidden kingdom they'd exposed was just one part of a larger war, a war between those who used power to control and those humble enough to use it to protect.
The question was, were they ready for what would come next?
1 year after the Malaysian raid, Sarah Mitchell stood in the garden of her parents' restored Vermont home, watching Emma and Tyler play with other children rescued from trafficking operations. The Phoenix Foundation had transformed their trauma into triumph, each child now had a chance at the life they deserved. The last of the Carlyle Group's directors was sentenced today, Harrison announced, walking up the garden path with a stack of newspapers.
25 years, no possibility of parole.
Sarah smiled, touching her mother's pearls.
And the network? Dismantled in 43 countries. Victoria's sister James has been instrumental in helping us track down the remaining cells in Asia.
The intelligence she gathered during her years in hiding has been invaluable. Inside the house, now converted into the Phoenix Foundation's headquarters, dozens of people worked at computers, coordinating anti-trafficking operations worldwide. Lily had developed an AI system that could predict where new exploitation networks might emerge, while Michael's documentaries had sparked a global movement for corporate accountability.
Ms. Mitchell, called Agent Davis, now Director Davis of the International Task Force on Organized Crime, you need to see this.
On the main screen, a familiar face appeared, Richard Maxwell Jr., broadcasting from prison.
I'm ready to talk, he said. About everything. The people above us, the ones who gave the orders. I can't live with it anymore. Sarah studied his face, seeing genuine remorse for the first time. Set up a secure channel, she instructed. And get Catherine Reynolds on the line.
Victoria, who had just returned from testifying at the UN, joined them.
Are you sure about this? The people he's talking about, they're the most powerful individuals in the world.
That's exactly why we need to expose them, Sarah replied. As long as they operate in shadows, they can control through fear. Just then, Lily burst in, her face pale.
We've been hacked. Someone's accessing our secure files.
On every screen in the room, a symbol appeared, a crown wrapped in thorns. Below it, a message, "You've disrupted the natural order, Ms. Mitchell. Now you'll learn the cost." Simultaneously, alerts began popping up worldwide.
Bank accounts frozen.
Arrest warrants issued on fabricated charges. Media outlets running coordinated smear campaigns. They call themselves the Crown Consortium, Richard Jr.'s voice crackled through the speakers.
They're the ones who created organizations like Maxwell Industries and the Carlyle Group. This is how they respond to threats.
But Sarah had learned from her past battles.
Lily, initiate Protocol Phoenix. Immediately, their systems began transferring to backup servers. Catherine Reynolds' network switched to emergency broadcasting. Around the world, their allies, journalists, activists, reformed businesspeople, activated contingency plans.
You see, Sarah addressed the crown symbol on their screens, we expected this. Every person you try to silence now has a dead man switch. Every piece of evidence you try to erase exists in multiple locations. You taught us well, about power, about control, about fear. She stepped closer to the camera she knew they were watching through. But you never understood the most important lesson: real power doesn't come from wealth or control. It comes from the courage of ordinary people standing together. As if in response, reports began flooding in from around the world.
Protests erupting outside Crown Consortium companies. Whistleblowers emerging from their organizations. Government investigations launching in multiple countries.
That's the thing about trying to bury people, Sarah continued, echoing her grandmother's words from so long ago. Sometimes they grow into something stronger than you ever imagined. The crown symbol flickered and died as Lily regained control of their systems. But the war wasn't over, it was evolving.
We've identified 13 Crown Consortium board members, Harrison reported.
Hidden behind layers of shell companies and legal protection. Then that's where we start, Sarah decided. Not with violence or vengeance, but with truth. The same way we brought down the Maxwells in Carlisle. She gathered her team, Victoria, Michael, Lily, James, Maya's resistance fighters now turned legitimate security consultants, Agent Davis, Harrison, and dozens of others who had joined their cause. They think they can stop us by attacking our organization, she told them.
But the Phoenix Foundation isn't just an organization, it's an idea. The idea that humble people, standing together, can face down giants.
As she spoke, more messages poured in from their global network.
A teacher in Brazil reporting suspicious construction near a school. A nurse in Thailand noticing patterns among her patients. A banker in Switzerland questioning transactions. This is how we win, Sarah declared.
Not in one big battle, but in thousands of small acts of courage.
Every person who refuses to be silenced.
Every witness who steps forward. Every child we save. She touched her mother's pearls one last time, remembering the lessons that had brought her here.
My parents taught me that standing up for what's right isn't about being powerful or important.
It's about being brave enough to take that first step, humble enough to ask for help, and determined enough to keep going no matter what. The sun was setting over the Vermont mountains, painting the sky in colors of hope. In the garden, Emma and Tyler laughed with their new friends, their trauma healing in the warmth of community and care. Sarah looked at her reflection in the window, no longer the scared foundation manager from the Maxwell Gala, but not quite the international crusader others saw her as. Just a humble woman who had discovered that the greatest power comes from helping others find their strength.
So what's next? Michael asked, camera ready as always.
Sarah smiled, thinking of all the battles ahead, and all the brave souls ready to fight them.
We do what we've always done. We stand together. We protect the vulnerable. We shine light into the darkness.
And we remember, she added, looking at the children playing, that every time they try to bury us, we grow stronger. As night fell over the Phoenix Foundation headquarters, lights began coming on in windows around the world, ordinary people standing watch, keeping faith, refusing to let the darkness win. The Crown Consortium was powerful, but they faced something they couldn't buy or bully, the combined courage of humble hearts determined to do what's right. And in that courage lay the seeds of a better world.